Okay, so what happens is Santa Anna shows up in San Antonio at the head of his army. One of the things you need to realize, it's going to take weeks and weeks for Santa Anna's entire army to get to San Antonio. The roads are terrible in Texas. His army is strung out all the way from the Rio Grande to San Antonio. So when Santa Anna shows up in San Antonio in late February 1836, he doesn't show up magically with his entire army. He shows up with the vanguard of his army, and his troops keep filing in. Now, the story that I think is the most accurate story about when Santa Anna shows up is this. The defenders of San Antonio had been partying, they'd been celebrating. Washington's birthday used to be a national holiday, kind of like July 4th. And many of the defenders of San Antonio actually had been drinking the night before Santa Anna shows up in San Antonio. They had pawned their weapons. And what happens is, after Washington's birthday, someone goes to one of the towers at San Fernando Cathedral and spots the vanguard of Santa Anna's army, and then everybody goes nuts. They get their arms back, and they decide that they're going to try to make a stand at the Alamo, which was a huge mistake. There were less than 200 defenders of the Alamo, and the Alamo grounds, of course, if you go there today, it seems very small. But the Alamo grounds, the walls of the Alamo, were far larger than they are today. It would have taken an army at least 4 times the size of 200 to defend the Alamo, and maybe even more. So what Travis did when these defenders in San Antonio, after Santa Anna shows up, when they go into the Alamo and they kind of lock themselves in the Alamo, they kind of doom themselves. It was a major mistake. They just couldn't defend it. They should have just taken off. They should have just run to fight another day. But instead, they made a terrible mistake. They basically trapped themselves in the Alamo. Now, you might want to ask, why were they surprised when Santa Anna shows up? Especially because Seguin's Tejanos had been telling Travis that Santa Anna was heading toward San Antonio. Well, the reason for that was Travis, you might remember in an earlier podcast, he was a hothead. He was not somebody that respected Tejanos. He basically didn't trust Seguin. And he didn't trust Seguin's intelligence reports. Travis was not a great military leader. So that's why Travis was surprised when Santa Anna shows up. He had been warned, but he ignores the warnings. Now, one of the things that we're pretty sure that happened is within a couple of days after Santa Anna shows up in San Antonio and the defenders of the Alamo basically trap themselves in the Alamo, it seems pretty clear that Travis tried to surrender to Santa Anna. Again, that goes against the Texas myth that the defenders of the Alamo wanted to fight to the death. But it turns out that no, Travis did try to surrender. It seems pretty clear that he did. But Santa Anna refused to accept his surrender. The reason for that is Santa Anna wanted a spectacular victory. He wanted to kill all the defenders of the Alamo. He wanted to do what Arredondo had done in 1813. He wanted to really punish the defenders of the Alamo, to send a message to other Texas revolutionaries and to the world that he was a very tough guy, and that anybody, and to Mexico, the rest of Mexico as well, that anybody that opposed him, that he was going to wipe out. So Travis tried to surrender, but Santa Anna wouldn't let him. So what happens is that on March 6th, the attack on the Alamo occurs. It's extremely bloody attack. 200 defenders managed to kill 600 Mexican troops. One of the things about the Alamo, it's kind of known, but it's not known. It was unbelievably brutal. 800 men were killed in close quarters in just a couple of hours, and most of the fighting was hand to hand. It was unbelievably brutal. It was not romantic in any sense of the word. For the Mexican army, the Battle of the Alamo, although the Mexican army won, was disastrous because the 600 soldiers that were killed were some of the best soldiers Santa Anna had. That's why they were killed. They were in there fighting the Texans. So although Santa Anna won the battle, he lost some of his best soldiers. And one of the things that we know that Pena talks about is this. Santa Anna's soldiers were furious at him after the Battle of the Alamo. They were furious for two reasons. First of all, Santa Anna rushed the attack. There was no reason for him to attack the Alamo on March 6th. He could have waited. Especially, he could have waited for his heavy artillery, which was still on the road from the Rio Grande to San Antonio. He could have bombed the Alamo into submission. The reason he didn't wait is he wanted to kill everybody in the Alamo. He didn't want them to surrender. He didn't want to give them a chance to surrender. So that's why he rushed the attack. And the Mexican soldiers knew that. Also, Pena reports that that Davy Crockett was captured, and that with 5 or 6 of his men, it's unclear, and that he was led to Santa Anna the next day. Santa Anna was angry that he hadn't been killed, and he orders Crockett executed on the spot. Pena reports that the members of the Mexican army were angry at the execution of Crockett, that they responded icily to Santa Anna when he gave his victory speech. This is very important because the Mexican army is just usually painted as very cruel, barbaric. But what Pena does is he humanizes the Mexican army. Mexican soldiers are mad at the murder of Davy Crockett. They don't like it. They think it stinks. They're also mad at Santa Anna. So suddenly now the Mexican army gains a little bit of humanity in Pena's account. But again, I just want to point out that Pena is not writing his so-called diary to tarnish Davy Crockett's reputation. Why he's writing the so-called diary is he wants to expose Santa Anna's cruelty, his execution of these prisoners of war, and there's also other accounts that talk about Crockett being executed after the battle, but we'll talk about that later. And he also wants to expose how inept Santa Anna was, that he just did not know what he was doing as a general. So this is the whole idea about the Pena diary. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about San Jacinto. What happens is Houston manages to train an army and it regroups. And you know what? I think instead of just kind of rushing it, I think I'll stop there for today. I am going to, and this is where I'll quiz you to the end of chapter 3 next time I see you. And what I'll do when in the next class, I'll give a short podcast that will talk about the rest of the Texas Revolution and also some more about the dispute over the Pena diary. But for now, what I want to get across is the Pena diary is an expose of Santa Anna's cruelty, how he was a terrible general. It was not designed to tarnish Davy Crockett's reputation, and there's a lot of confusion about the Pena diary. It was never published during his lifetime. The most important thing is it wasn't a diary. Pena kept working on it for 3 years after 1836 until ultimately he died, I think, in the early 1940s. It was never published in his lifetime. Bits and pieces of it were published nearly 100 years later.